I still feel the cold from that day, a cold that penetrates the bones of my soul, not just my flesh. Shadows danced in the thick air, an air laden with a metallic stench of rust and despair, while the muffled screams of an invisible crowd pierced the silence. I was in a place that was and was not a distortion of the familiar, a soccer stadium consumed by a smoldering fire where the once emerald green grass had become a carpet of ashes and pain. My own breath caught in my throat, and the Argentine jersey I had once proudly worn now felt like a shroud soaked in icy sweat. My hands, which had once stopped impossible balls, trembled uncontrollably, not from physical exertion, but from the weight of a revelation that was just beginning. From the depths of that desolation emerged a gigantic, amorphous silhouette, a stain in the darkness that absorbed the little light that dared to exist. It had no human or animal form, only the essence of an ancient and palpable evil, a deep hum that resonated in my chest, like the lament of millions of lost souls. Suddenly, without warning, the darkness surrounding the entity flickered, and before my astonished gaze, the vision materialized with chilling clarity. My brothers from the Argentine national team, not on a playing field, but in an abyss of torment. Their faces, once filled with the euphoria of victory, were now contorted in indescribable agony. Their mouths opened in silent screams that still echo in my memory. A perpetual lament that defies reason and sanity. The light blue and white shirts that covered them were stained not with mud or sweat, but with a viscous, dark substance that resembled blood and mud, an amalgam of impurity and suffering. Their eyes, the same eyes that once shone with the champion's ambition, reflected an unfathomable emptiness, a despair that knew no end. One by one, I saw them. The captain, the striker, the unwavering defenders, all writhing in a macabre dance of eternal pain. There was no visible fire or literal chains, but the torment was palpable, an invisible prison forged from their own vanities and ambitions. Hell, not as depicted in paintings, but as a state of being, an existential damnation beyond description, where hope was a forgotten concept and eternity stretched on like endless torture. I woke with a start, my body drenched in cold sweat, there. Freeze, sulfur, and mud still permeating my nostrils, even though I was lying on my filthy boarding house mattress. My hands trembled, my muscles ached from the tension of the nightmare, or perhaps from reality. I had gone from being the nation's idol, the goalkeeper who flew between the posts, to a walking skeleton. A prisoner of heroin and despair. The peeling walls of their room seemed to close in on me, reflecting the confinement of my own soul. Memories of past glory mingled with hellish visions, and I couldn't tell which of the two realities was more brutal. Fame, money, idolatry, everything had vanished like smoke, leaving only an unbearable void and the echo of those silent screams. My first years of my career were a whirlwind of cheers and triumphs. Every game was a hymn to my skill. Every save was a miracle for the crowd chanting my name. The stadium lights, the camera flashes, the roar of the crowd. It was all an intoxicating symphony that fueled my ego. But amidst that euphoria, there was always a shadow, a figure watching me from the stands. With a barely perceptible, almost harmless smile. He was an elegant man, with a penetrating gaze and a charisma that attracted everyone effortlessly. His presence was subtle at first, almost like a coincidence. But over time it became constant, a kind of silent mezzanine that appeared at key moments, always offering a word of encouragement. A piece of advice that seemed infallible, a shortcut to even greater glory, a whispered promise of invincibility for me and my teammates. Ambition, like poison ivy, began to entangle my heart. The pressure to be the best, to win at all costs, led me to make decisions that at the time seemed insignificant. I accepted small favors, small shortcuts that this enigmatic figure offered me. It wasn't a blood pact, no, it was more subtle. A series of moral commitments that eroded my faith, like water drop by drop. I began to wear an amulet he gave me, a dark stone that he said would bring me luck. My reflection in the mirror became complacent. My eyes, once humble, now shone with a veiled arrogance. My loved ones, my family, my old friends began to feel distant, as if an invisible barrier had risen between us, woven with the threads of my success and its hidden price. The victories kept coming, but their taste had turned bitter, almost metallic. Every goal I saved, every cup we raised, was accompanied by a sinister echo in my mind, a whisper that reminded me of the price. The world around me, which had once felt vibrant and colorful, began to take on a grayish hue, as if a patina of sadness had settled over everything. Nights were a torment. Nightmares became recurrent. I saw fragments of the vision, shadows twisting, faces disfigured, a chorus of wails that I couldn't silence, not even with the alcohol or drugs that had entered my life as silent companions in my descent. It was David's glory, but forged from the bricks of hell. Each victory was a step deeper into darkness. Each applause was another link in the chain that bound me to the organization. The injuries began one after another, mysterious and debilitating. My body, once a fortress, became fragile and treacherous. Games were lost in inexplicable ways, goals I would have previously saved with ease now slipped through my hands like sand. The press, once adoring, turned critical. Then cruel. My name, once chanted in stadiums, was now whispered with pity or contempt. I tried to cling to the faith of my childhood, to recite forgotten prayers, but the voice of the devil, now clear and mocking, mocked my efforts, laughing at my despair, reminding me that I had sold not only my soul, but that of my brothers, that of my nation, for a mirage of greatness. He told me, they weren't taken, Elias. They jumped in. You just opened the door. The distortions became more frequent, more vivid. The shadows in my room weren't just shadows. They danced, stretched, transformed into grotesque figures with red eyes and malicious smiles. The faces of people on the street contorted for a moment into demonic expressions. Their voices became gut-wrenching cacophonies. I tried to talk to my family, to old friends, about what I was seeing, what I was feeling. They looked at me with pity, with concern. They told me I was tired, that I needed help, that I was hallucinating. No one believed me. The isolation deepened, and I felt like a leper, not of the flesh, but of the spirit, condemned to carry a truth no one could bear, a vision that devoured me from within. In my nightmares, the entity I dragged myself to a dark mirror, where I saw not my reflection, but that of my teammates, their souls wasting away. Each vision was a layered revelation, a deeper agony. I saw the captain, the leader, entangled in webs of pride and greed, his hands clutching a trophy, melting to ashes. I saw the striker whose mouth filled with mud as he tried to scream, choked by the vanity of his triumphs. Each in their own way had succumbed to their vices, their unbridled ambitions, opening fissures in their souls, through which darkness infiltrated, not by force, but by seduction. They hadn't been dragged. They had walked into the abyss, blinded by the promise of earthly glory, and I had been, unknowingly, the herald of their fall. One day, as I lay on the floor of my apartment, consumed by fever and torment, a bright light burst in through the window, not sunlight, but an immaculate, pure glory that filled the room. It was a light that didn't burn, but purified, that healed. From that light emerged a miracle. My arms, once riddled with injection marks and trembling from withdrawal, stretched. My fingers straightened, and the needle wounds disappeared, leaving behind new skin with no trace of my past. My eyes, once bloodshot and dull, regained a radiance I hadn't seen in years. It was a liberation without human intervention, not by medication, but by divine intervention, an undeserved grace that washed and restored me without me lifting a finger. And then a voice, not a sound audible to the ear, but a voice that resonated directly in my spirit, in the depths of my being. A voice that was both thunder and a whisper, a melody and a command. He called me by my name, Elijah. And then I did not call you so that the glory of men would consume you, but so that my glory would be manifested through your testimony. It was a voice that did not judge, but loved. A voice that knew me beyond my sins, beyond my fall. There were no sermons or condemnations, only the naked truth of his unconditional love, a truth that healed the invisible wounds of my soul and gave me a peace that surpassed all understanding, a peace that contrasted brutally with the torment I had experienced. The light intensified, and in it I could see no more shadows, no more distortions. The filth of the room, the empty bottles, the scattered syringes, everything seemed to transform in that light. From every object, from every corner, emerged a tiny spark of divinity, of redemption. There was no preaching, no pastor laying on hands, only the pure manifestation of God's presence, filling every particle of my being, revealing the glory that was already in the world, but which my darkened eyes had been unable to see. It was a revelation beyond words, an understanding that seared itself into my soul, showing me that beauty and holiness were everywhere, even in the deepest darkness, if one had the eyes of the Spirit open. That voice guided me. I rose not with the sluggishness of a convalescent, but with renewed strength, as if every cell in my body had been imbued with new life. I left that room not as the prisoner I had entered, but as a free man, a witness to the impossible. The morning sun, which had previously seemed indifferent, now shone with purpose. Each ray was a reminder of the mercy I had received. The city air, once thick and polluted, now filled my lungs with a freshness I hadn't felt in years. Everything around me, every person, every building, every tree, seemed to vibrate with a divine energy that had previously been imperceptible to me, a symphony of creation that resonated in my heart. But peace didn't erase the memory. The vision of the Argentine national team in hell remained etched in my mind, not as a paralyzing nightmare, but as a warning. I understood that it wasn't a condemnation imposed by God, but the consequence of choices, of excessive ambitions, of idolatry for earthly glory. It was the revelation of the destiny of those who give in to the lies of the adversary, believing they can build their own kingdom without the light of the Creator. My heart was filled with overwhelming compassion. Not for myself, but for those who, as they had been seduced by the false glitter of the world, by the empty promise of an immortality that does not exist outside of divine truth. I began to share my testimony. At first in the streets, then in small churches, then in stadiums, filled with believers and non-believers. My voice, once hoarse and weak, became loud, clear, resonating with the authority of one who has seen the ineffable. I didn't talk about football or my glorious past, but about redemption, the power of faith, the reality of good and evil, the consequences of our decisions. Each word was an echo of the voice of God I had heard, an invitation to the truth that had set me free. People listened, some with skepticism, others with tears in their eyes, but all felt the weight of my experience, the truth that emanated from every fiber of my being. Miracles manifested around me. I didn't seek them out, I didn't ask for them, they just happened. Sick people rose from their wheelchairs upon hearing my testimony. Addicts found sobriety. Families were reconciled. It wasn't my power, but that of the one who had restored me, working through my vulnerability and my obedience. Each healing, each deliverance was a confirmation that the glory of God manifested without preaching doesn't need temples of stone or eloquent speeches, but rather broken hearts willing to be vessels of His love. People saw the transformation in me, the scars of my past, but also the light that now surrounded me. And they understood that hope wasn't a pipe dream, but a palpable reality. People asked me, and the Argentine national team, "Did you really see them in hell?" I responded, "I saw what darkness is capable of doing to those who open the door to it. It is not a condemnation from God, but the consequence of spiritual blindness, of the pursuit of a perishable glory. God did not place them there. They, by their own choices, surrendered themselves to a path of destruction. My words were not a judgment, but a warning, an echo of the profound compassion that had been revealed to me. I was not a judge, but a messenger, a witness to God's love that seeks to redeem even in the deepest abyss. The spiritual sensationalism my story generated did not affect me. I understood that people needed to be shaken, to awaken from their lethargy. If a vision of hell with the Argentine national team could make someone stop to think about their own eternity, about their own decisions, then my suffering had not been in vain. My testimony was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it showed the horror of separation from God. On the other hand, the immensity of His grace and His power to rescue even the most lost. Every word was an act of love, a hand extended to those who were still walking in darkness, blind to the reality I had faced. Biblical references flowed out of me effortlessly, not as memorized quotes, but as living truths that wove into my experience. The vanity of life, the deception of the parable of the prodigal son, the temptation of Christ in the desert, everything took on new meaning, a personal resonance. I understood that the Bible was not just an ancient book, but a map for the soul, a guide to navigate the turbulent waters of existence and avoid the depths of despair. Every verse, every story became a light on the path, revealing the wisdom that had always been there, waiting to be discovered by a heart thirsting for truth. And so my life became a beacon. He wasn't the famous goalkeeper or the fallen addict, but Pastor Elias Montenegro. A man who had seen hell and been rescued by the glory of God. My voice was my instrument, my story, my sermon. Every dawn was a reminder of mercy, every dusk an opportunity to share the truth that had been revealed to me. Not a day went by without the vision returning to my mind, but now it didn't paralyze me, it drove me on, reminding me of the urgency of my mission, the need to bring light to those who still lived in darkness, oblivious to the price of their souls. The deepest revelation came one day while I was praying. It wasn't a vision, but a pure understanding. I understood that hell is not just a place of fire and physical torment, but a state of absolute separation from God, an existential void where the very essence of love and hope has been extinguished. And that every choice that distances us from God's light, no matter how insignificant it may seem, is a step closer to that abyss. The Argentine national team I saw wasn't a specific condemnation, but a symbol, a powerful image to awaken those who worshipped earthly glory above eternal glory. It was a mirror not only for them, but for all of us. That revelation filled me not with fear, but with a serene determination. My heart, which had once been filled with bitterness and despair, now overflowed with compassion. I understood that my mission was not to judge, but to love, not to condemn, but to redeem. The vision, which at first was torture, became my fuel, my constant reminder of the urgency of the gospel, of the need to shout the truth from the rooftops, to warn souls lost in the mirage of the world. It was a cross I carried, but also a crown, a living testimony that God's grace is greater than any abyss, more powerful than any sin, capable of transforming the darkest of falls into the brightest of hopes. My life is now a walking testimony. Every wrinkle on my face tells a story. Every invisible scar on my soul is a reminder of the power of redemption. I walk through the world like a pilgrim, with my eyes open to the signs, to the voices of the Spirit that guide me. The voice of God, which once resonated in the depths of my being, is now the compass of my existence, the light that illuminates my every step. I no longer long for the glory of men, I seek only to manifest the glory of the one who rescued me from the abyss, the one who showed me the truth, however painful, so that others could be free. My life is an offering, a song of gratitude for the undeserved grace that reached me. And so I continue forward, carrying the message. Some call me crazy, a fanatic, but I know what I saw, what I felt, what I experienced. The reality of hell is as palpable as the reality of God's love. And both are truths that cannot be ignored. My testimony is not a soccer story, but a parable of humanity, of the eternal struggle between light and darkness, between the ephemeral glory of the world and the eternal glory of the kingdom. And if my voice can be a beacon in the night for even one lost soul, then it will all be worth it. The vision of the Argentine national team in hell was not the end of my story, but the beginning of my true life, the life God had destined for me, a testimony of His power. The burden of the vision became a weight, but a weight that empowered me. It reminded me that every soul is precious, that every choice has eternal consequences. I could no longer look at people the same way. I could no longer ignore their spiritual battle that rages in every human heart. My eyes had been opened to a dimension of reality that most ignore. A dimension where the forces of good and evil fight for the possession of souls. And I, the fallen doorman, the redeemed addict, has become a soldier of the light, armed with the truth that had been revealed to me. My testimony wasn't just a story, it was a call, a trumpet sounding in the night to awaken the sleeping. The shadowy figure that had seduced me in my glory days never appeared again. He appeared visibly, but his influence, the subtlety of his deception, became clearer. I understood that he doesn't always manifest himself with horns and tridents. He often disguises himself as a benefactor, an opportunity, a shortcut to success. He is the voice that whispers in our ears, promising everything our carnal hearts yearn for in exchange for a price we can't see until it's too late. And that understanding was another layer of revelation, a warning to me and to everyone that the true battle is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, against the darkness masquerading as light. My life was no longer easy. The temptations persisted, the memories hurt, and the path of faith demanded constant vigilance. But the difference was that now I was not alone. God's voice, the echo of His love, was my constant guide, my strength in weakness. And although the vision of hell remained a vivid memory, it no longer chained me, it freed me, propelling me to live each day with purpose, with gratitude, sharing the truth that had been given to me at such a high cost, but with an infinitely greater reward. My testimony is not a horror story, but a hymn to redemption, a reminder that even from the deepest abyss, God's hand can reach out and rescue a lost soul. The final revelation was a comfort in the midst of horror. I understood that God's love is so vast, so unconditional, that even in hell, His mercy extends, not to rescue those who refused Him, but to remind us that the choice is ours, that the door to redemption is always open to those who seek it with a repentant heart. The vision was not an unalterable sentence for the Argentine national team, but a mirror, a reflection of the consequences of a life without God. One last chance for those who heard it to change their course. And my mission, my only purpose now, is to be the voice that shouts that warning and that hope in a world that often prefers to close its eyes. And so I continue on my path. Pastor Elias Montenegro, a fallen former idol who saw hell, but was lifted up by grace. My feet no longer tread the fields of play, but the paths of faith, bringing the gospel not with fancy words, but with the raw truth of a supernatural experience. The image of the Argentine national team in hell remains etched in my soul, a constant reminder of the thin line that separates earthly glory from eternal damnation and of the world's immense need for true light. May my testimony be a beacon, a cry in the night, so that no one else has to see what I saw, so that no one else is lost in the abyss of their own ambitions. Christian witness. A demon showed me the Argentine national team in hell. Part 2. My life had become a constant reminder of the thin line between light and darkness, a precarious balance that few understood. People approached me, some with morbid curiosity, others with a genuine hunger for truth, seeking answers to the questions that modern life could not satisfy. My eyes, which had seen the torment of those lost, now saw the silent desperation on the faces of the crowd, souls thirsting for a purpose that went beyond consumption and fleeting satisfaction. I was not a preacher with theories, but a scarred witness. And that authenticity, that palpable pain in my voice, was what truly touched hearts, opening cracks in disbelief and allowing the light to filter in. I remember one particular night in a small chapel on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. The rain pounded the tin roof, creating a melancholic symphony that accompanied my words. I spoke of spiritual blindness, of how unbridled ambition can lead us down seemingly glorious paths that end in abysses of despair. Suddenly, in the middle of my story, a young man in the front row, a soccer player, a promising young man I had played with in the youth teams, stood up, trembling. His eyes were filled with tears, and his body was convulsing. It wasn't a visible possession, but an internal battle, a revelation of his own demons, of the temptations that already plagued him in his fledgling career. A chill ran down my spine, a vivid reminder of my own fall. The atmosphere in the chapel tensed. Some were frightened, others approached the young man to help him, but I felt a supernatural urgency. I raised my hand, not to touch him, but to extend a silent blessing. My words weren't an exorcism, but a whispered prayer, a plea to the same light that had rescued me. And in that instant, the young man fell to his knees, not out of weakness, but as if an invisible burden had been lifted from him. His face was transfigured. The anguish dissolved into a cry of relief, a palpable liberation that filled the space. There were no screams or violent demonstrations, only a profound peace that descended upon him and everyone present. A miracle of spiritual healing that required no human intervention, only faith and the presence of the Spirit. After that, the young man's testimony merged with mine. He recounted how he had been on the verge of signing a contract that compromised his integrity, how the pursuit of fame and money had blinded him. His story mirrored mine, but with a different ending, a twist of redemption that had previously seemed unattainable. This event not only impacted the local community, but spread like wildfire, giving my message a new dimension, living proof that hell was not just a distant vision, but a real threat, and that divine deliverance was a tangible possibility for all those willing to see. The glory of God manifested without preaching continued to be the driving force behind everything. I didn't need eloquent sermons or demonstrations of power. The simple truth of my experience, the presence of light in my life and in the miracles that happened, spoke louder than any words. Once, while walking through a slum, I met a mother and her son, laid low by an incurable illness that the doctors had given up on. I didn't speak to them about faith with complex speeches, I simply told them my story, my encounter with hell, and the voice that had rescued me. As I spoke, the woman began to cry, not from sadness, but from a sudden hope. The child, who could barely breathe, coughed, and instantly his pale complexion regained color. His eyes opened with a clarity they had never had before. It was a silent healing, a discreet but undeniable miracle, further proof that the divine presence does not need to be loudly proclaimed, but is manifested in pure and unconditional grace. God's voice continued to be my guide, resonating in my spirit, adapting to the circumstances of each day. It was not a constant, audible voice, but a subtle guide, a deep intuition, a whisper that showed me the way, the right words for each situation. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I felt his presence like a comforting warmth that enveloped my soul, reminding me that I was not alone, that my burden was shared. Other times, it was a gentle rebuke, a loving correction that set me on course when my humanity tended to stray, when the echo of vanity or discouragement tried to creep back into my heart. This direct communication, this intimate relationship with the divine, was my anchor in the storm, the inexhaustible source of my strength. I understood that my testimony, the story of the devil and the Argentine national team in hell, was a modern biblical image, a parable for a generation that had disconnected from eternal truths. The idols of soccer, fame, and money had become the golden calves of our time. And the vision was a warning, a revelation of what happens when the soul is sold for a handful of earthly glory. It was like a prophetic vision from the book of Revelation, not in the distant future, but in the here and now. Now, a manifestation of the judgment already operating in the hearts of men and the consequences of their choices. The despair I saw on the players' faces was the result of idolatry, a reflection of what happens when creation is worshipped instead of the Creator. The weight of my experience intensified with each new miracle, with each soul touched. It wasn't a weight of burden, but of responsibility. I felt that each day was an opportunity to redeem my past, to use the darkness I had experienced as a flashlight for others. My words, once filled with pain and bitterness, now flowed with immense compassion, an urgency to warn my brothers and sisters of the subtle deception that lurked in them, of the empty promises of the world that lead to perdition. Life was no longer about me, but about a greater purpose, to be an instrument in God's hands to reveal His truth and His love to a thirsty world, even if sometimes it didn't know it. And in that profound revelation, in that understanding that went beyond my limited human comprehension, I realized something crucial. The devil didn't show me the Argentine national team in hell out of wanton malice, but with a perverse purpose. He wanted to break me, destroy me, use that vision to make me completely despair and deny God. He wanted me to see the fate of my teammates and feel that there was no hope for anyone, not even me. But what he wanted to use to ruin me, God transformed into my most powerful testimony, the most effective weapon to fight deception. The enemy tried to use horror to extinguish my faith, but the Lord turned it into a spark that ignited thousands of souls. The spiritual sensationalism of my story wasn't a strategy, but a consequence. How could I tell what I saw without it sounding extraordinary, prophetic, even terrifying? The truth is that spiritual reality is far more dramatic than the human mind can conceive. And if my testimony, with its stark details and shocking visions, managed to make people stop for a moment in their race toward nothingness, then it was a price worth paying. I wasn't seeking fame or approval. I just wanted people to know that hell is real, that the consequences are eternal, and that there is a way out, a hand extended by divine grace that can rescue even the most lost. The image of the players, the idols of my nation, in that abyss of torment wasn't a condemnation, it was a wake-up call, a silent cry that transcended the barriers of time and space. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, and each time my heart shrank, but it was also filled with renewed determination. I couldn't remain silent, I couldn't ignore the warning. My life had become a channel, a voice for those who had no voice, an echo of the truth that, though painful, was necessary for the salvation of souls. And so with each testimony, with each prayer, with each miracle, I felt I was freeing them a little more, not from hell itself, but from the ignorance that led them to it. The path has not been easy. I have faced criticism, ridicule, accusations of madness and manipulation, but none of it matters. The revealed truth is my shield, and the voice of God is my strength. The peace I experience now, a peace that surpasses all understanding, is the greatest proof that what I experienced was not a hallucination, but divine intervention. I no longer seek the approval of the world, because my validation comes from above, from the one who rescued me from the clutches of death and gave me a new life, a new purpose. My past of glory and fall, of fame and addiction, of hellish vision and miraculous redemption, is now an altar upon which God's inexhaustible grace is manifested. My sermons are no longer just words. They are a sensorial experience, an immersion in the spiritual reality I experienced. When I speak of the stench of sulfur, people can almost smell it. When I describe the silent screams of the damned, anguish grips their hearts. It's not dramatization, it's simply the truth. And that truth, delivered with passion and authenticity, has the power to penetrate the toughest barriers and break the most deeply held paradigms. Because a spiritual experience, when genuine, transcends reason and is etched directly into the soul, leaving an indelible mark that leads to reflection and, in many cases, conversion. The visual symbolism of my testimony manifested itself in every detail of my new life. I blessed the soccer jerseys that people brought me to autograph, turning them into the reminder that true victory is not won on a field, but in the spirit. The cups and medals offered to me as gifts, I used as examples of perishable glory, contrasting them with the crown of eternal life. Every element of my past was transformed into a tool for the gospel, a tangible illustration of the truths I now proclaimed. It was as if God took the fragments of my broken life and united them to create a masterpiece of redemption, a living testimony to His transforming power. The prophecy had been fulfilled in my life. My fall was the preamble to my arise, my vision of hell the catalyst for my mission. And therein lies the profound revelation. God can use even the darkest experiences, the most terrifying encounters for His glorious purposes. My encounter with the devil, which seemed like the end of everything, was actually the beginning of my true existence, the gateway to a spiritual dimension previously foreign to me. I don't wish for the vision to return, but I am grateful for its existence, because without it, without the horror I witnessed, I would never have known the depth of God's love, which rescued me and gave me a voice for eternity. The echo of God's voice that resonated in my spirit that day has never faded. Sometimes, amid the bustle of the world, I feel His presence like a gentle breeze, a reminder of His unwavering faithfulness. Other times, it is a consuming fire that compels me to keep going, to not falter, to fulfill the mission entrusted to me. It is a constant communication, a living relationship that sustains and guides me every step of the way. I no longer look for miracles to validate my faith. My own life is the greatest miracle, the most eloquent testimony that God is real, that hell is real, and that the hope of redemption is more real than anything else. And in that deep emotion, in that mixture of gratitude and reverence, I realize that my story is not just me,